All right, well, welcome. I'm here with Jackson Wheat, and this is the 8th video in a series on a creationist online course for young earth creationism taught by Kevin Conover. It's my 8th video in the series, but it's actually his, I think, 3rd class on it. And this is first of 2 videos that it's going to be on Did Man Live with Dinosaurs? So we're going to introduce Jackson Wheat here, and he's going to tell you a little bit about himself.
Hello, thank you for having me. I also run a YouTube channel. It's just my name, Jackson Wheat, where I talk predominantly about evolutionary biology, paleontology, a little bit of geology, and I do occasional talks with creationists to try to pick their brain about why they think evolution is wrong or evil or what have you, and so it's all fun, lots of fun stuff, and
All
so.
right.
I had a good time watching this because it, intersects a lot with what I do. So,
All right, we are going to go to his video here in just a second.
Welcome to Educate for Life Online. This is the 3rd class in our course, Created on Purpose or Evolved by Chance. Today we're going to be talking about dinosaurs and whether they support the creation account in the Bible or the theory of evolution. Let's get started. This is the United States Geological Survey website, and on it they have a frequently asked questions section. Somebody wrote in, did people and dinosaurs live at the same time? And they responded, no. After the dinosaurs died out, nearly 65 million years passed before people appeared on Earth. And this is the claim of evolutionary theory. The claim is that 65 million years ago, dinosaurs died out, and it wasn't until about 2.5 million years ago that our chimp-like ancestor eventually became people like we are today.
That's kind of a weird way to phrase it.
If you look right here, this is a geological time scale, and you'll notice on it, it shows when dinosaurs died out, and it shows when humans evolved. Now, this geological time scale, you won't find this anywhere else except in a textbook or on the internet. You won't find it out in the world anywhere in geology.
So that's totally wrong.
Nice and neat theory.
He says about 2.5 million years ago, we evolved from chimp-like ancestors. But the more chimp ancestors were further back, like 5-6 million years ago. 2.5 million years ago were the first members of Homo. And so stemming from the Australopithecines, who weren't chimps, or I guess you could say they were kind of chimp-like, but so are we also in a way. So.
He talks about evolutionary theory says that the Earth is that old. Well, right. It doesn't. Geologists say that the Earth is that old, and it's 2 separate sciences there. And he talks about the geologic time scale and how that it's not seen anywhere on Earth, that it's just, basically a picture in a book there. But it doesn't have to be. It's a collection of data. We don't have to see it exist in one place anywhere on Earth. It's a collection of data that we use. It's been compiled over, the last 150 years. So,
right.
But yeah, like you say, too, he's off on the timeline of human evolution. So.
Yeah, he also said that, you don't see the geologic column anywhere. Of course, that's a claim Kent Hovind regularly makes, which is just completely wrong. You can see sections of it, and we have an entire, field just outside of geology. I mean, you have chronostratigraphy, which is, where you look at the layers and compare them. You compare their time zone, or the timing of the layers, and so you can date things that way, and you use index fossils and radiometric dating to date things, and so you absolutely can. You can see Devonian strata atop Silurian strata. You can go to there's a site in England, I forget the Sicker Point.
Mm-hmm.
There's Sicker Point where you can go see Devonian atop Silurian strata. You go to the Grand Canyon, you see a bunch of different layers.
Right. Well, we got unconformities there, and yeah. But we have layers like the Coconino Sandstone and whatever in the Grand Canyon, and we don't see that all over the Earth, so we don't see a complete geologic column anywhere in the Earth as far as with every layer that we see. but we again, it's a collection of data. I mean, it's all dated by, like you said, radiometric and relative dating. So it's not something we have to have in one place like that in order to know that the data exists.
Right. It's kind of, one of the common analogies I like to use when dealing with creationists is, a crime scene. If no one saw the crime scene, can we still figure out who committed the crime? Use all the data that was there, to figure out who it was. And so, because a lot of times there isn't a witness, and you have to use blood samples or, credit card history or tire tracks or something like that to figure out, who it was.
Who was it did that video? The Were You There, Ken Spam? You've seen that one, haven't you?
Oh, that was Dark Matter 2525.
That was an amazing video, one of my favorites.
Yes, it was. Yeah, they come across the guy who committed the crime, and in the end, and they're like, "Did you see who it was?" And he says, "No." And they're like, "All right, well, you're gonna have to leave because this is still a crime scene." Yeah.
All right, we'll cut and move on.
Evolutionists and those who believe the Earth is billions of years old will say that humans and dinosaurs did not live together. Nobody has ever seen a live dinosaur, and dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago. What does the Bible say? The Bible says in Genesis 1:1, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them." That's in Exodus chapter 20, verse 11. And the question that becomes very clear here is, if it's true that God made everything in 6 days, all that is in them, Adam must have seen what? He must have seen dinosaurs. But can we take this and look at it from a scientific perspective and find that this is true? That's what we're going to look at today. So there are two basic theories about dinosaurs in the past. If you look at a creationist timeline, about 6,000 years ago, what happened? Well, if we look at the chronologies in the Bible, we end up with creation right about 6,000 years ago. 4,400 years ago, there was a worldwide flood. And 2,000 years ago, Christ came, and here we are today. Now, if we look at an evolutionary timeline, they say 14 billion years ago, the whole universe came into existence. Now, there's some changes in that. All the time, they're changing that number. But generally speaking, about 14 or 15 billion years ago, they say the universe came into existence through a naturalistic Big Bang. About 4.6 billion years ago, they say the Earth formed. And 3.8 billion years ago, the first life appears. Then 2.5 million years ago, the human line diverges from the ape-like ancestors. Now, where on these two timelines do dinosaurs fit in? Well, if we take a strict reading of Genesis, we read it as historical narrative, as it's intended to be read, then that means dinosaurs were created along with everything else about 6,000 years ago. According to evolutionists, dinosaurs evolved about 230 million years ago, and they went extinct 65 million years ago. Now, who's right? And does it really matter? Well, it does matter. And we can actually figure out who's right by looking at this from a logical, biblical, scientific, and historical perspective.
All right. Seems like he had the timeline pretty close there,
Sure.
as far as what we believe, what they believe. So.
Yeah. I have to disagree with him. Humans see dinosaurs every single day. You ever look up in the skies or in the trees?
Right.
Avian dinosaurs are all over the place.
Right. Of course, they don't believe that. So, he hasn't made the distinction between avian and non-avian dinosaurs. And we could probably correct him 1,000 times during the video on that.
It says he also made a comment when I watched this for the first time, which I thought was a little funny because it's clear he doesn't really understand the biblical history either. Because he says Genesis was meant to be read as a historical narrative. No, it isn't.
Right.
If you actually read if you read biblical scholars who are not young Earth creationists, meaning like the vast majority of biblical scholars, it's not a historical narrative. It's polemic. It's like this is this one God who's doing everything, as opposed to the other Sumerian religions where it's multiple gods creating the universe, whatever, and they're all along the same lines. I think Aaron talks about it where it's like, it's a week, whether you're talking about these other Mesopotamian gods or you're talking about Yahweh, and it's meant to be that way because it's arguing for this one specific God. And the notion that Genesis is meant to be read as a literal history is a very, very recent development. Like, I think post-Civil War was when the Southern Baptists really started taking a literalist.
Yeah, Seventh-day Adventists, and
and then the Seventh-day Adventists came along.
1890s, early 20th century.
Right.
And even it wasn't real popular. It didn't. I mean, it seemed to be a resurgence in the 60s with the book The Genesis Flood. Yeah, and
Woodmarap and Morris and Gish and all those guys. Yeah, you're right. It's an extremely recent development. So it's kind of funny to say it was meant to be taken as history when 95% of biblical scholarship throughout history has said, no, it's not.
So, whereas evolutionists say that humans and dinosaurs didn't live together, biblical creationists believe they did live together. Biblical creationists believe people have seen live dinosaurs, and dinosaurs went extinct recently, not 65 million years ago. What does the evidence tell us? The evidence speaks for itself and tells us that things were a lot different in the past. From that time of creation up to Noah's flood, there was a big difference in creation. Remember, when God created everything, he created it perfectly good. And things have slowly been getting worse and worse over time. If we look here at this longevity chart, it shows Adam and his lifespan. And the little blue segment there shows when he had his first child. Now, it shows that people lived to a very, very long time in the beginning before the flood. And gradually, their lifespans dropped off. Now, there's a scientific reason for this. We'll get into it later. But just keep an eye on this. This isn't mythical. This is real. People really lived up until their 900s. Methuselah, the oldest man to ever live, right? He's on there. He lived to 969 years old. And if you look here, we can see that the ages are dropping off. The average age before the flood was 912 years old. But the average age after the flood dropped from 400 years to 200 years to 100 years, and today to about 70 to 80 years old.
I mean, that entire spiel is, as they say in church, for the Bible tells me so.
Well, yeah, and there's absolutely no evidence that any people ever lived to be 800-900 years old. Yet he says it scientifically, is, and that it's true. And he's saying, you got to believe me here. It's true. But there's just absolutely no evidence. And the evidence is that, actually we lived shorter lifespans in the past. Life was harder, and, people didn't tend to live near as long. And we see that throughout recorded history. And there's no reason to believe it was any different pre-recorded history. So,
yeah. I think it's the Mayans. If you look at the recordings of their ancient kings, the stories about the ancient kings get more and more exaggerated as time goes on. Interestingly enough. And so in other creationist writings, they say, all cultures have a golden age. I don't know if that's true. I don't think it is. But it's like, there was a time when everything was great, everything was perfect. What does that mean? Oh, well, that's just the old, in the good old days. That's really all that is. It's just a legend about how things were better back then.
It kind of makes me wonder sometimes if they themselves realized that, going back and looking at genealogies, there wasn't enough time for things to have happened, and they kind of realized that. So, they added a bunch of ages to things just to extend it back as far as they could push it, So.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like Noah would have been, according to their genealogy, Noah would have been around at the time of the Tower of Babel. He would have lived long enough to see the Tower of Babel being built.
Yeah.
These guys were significantly overlapping in their times, and it's just nonsense.
Yep.
Now, this man right here, he is what's called a population geneticist. He's not a Christian. His Dr. Crow is his name. It seems clear that for the past few centuries, harmful mutations have been accumulating. The decrease in viability from mutation accumulation is 1 to 2% per generation. I do regard mutation accumulation as a problem. It's something like the population bomb, but with a much longer fuse. Now, what is he saying here? Well, the population bomb is this idea that as the population grows, the Earth will not be able to sustain the amount of people on the Earth. And that eventually we're going to have so many people, it's essentially going to break down the entire Earth, and we're going to have some sort of a mass extinction event, and most of life on Earth is going to be wiped out. Now, he's saying that's going to happen eventually, but he says mutation accumulation is also a bomb that's waiting to happen. We're accumulating mutations every generation. So he's saying that we lose 1 to 2% in viability as humans every generation. So your children will have more mutations than you, and you have more mutations than your parents did. And as those mutations grow, it's making the human person less likely to be able to survive and thrive as they live life, okay? So he's saying that eventually we're gonna go extinct because we're gonna accumulate too many damaging mutations that are gonna destroy us.
It's really funny that he brought this up because I've actually read through parts of this paper before. It's been flung at me by creationists because what he's referring to without referring to it is genetic entropy, which is which I say it's new. It's not new. It's repackaged. This is the modern version of an idea that has been around in creationism since the 60s. I know it's been around since the 60s because I have a creationist book from 67 that discusses this very concept. Of course, they assert it as true. So they asserted as fact for them that we're just breaking down over time, over the generations, before there was any data to corroborate this idea. So this is dogma that has been entrenched in creationism for generations. So today you have new guys like John Sanford, who's a plant geneticist, and he talks about him later, and a few others who are the new champions of this idea, and they've written books on it and whatnot. So Sanford quotes this paper. He quotes that specific passage, and that's probably where Conover is getting it. So the point of genetic entropy is that Sanford says natural selection, genetic drift, etc., beneficial mutations, none of these things are accumulating fast enough to overcome the amount of neutral and detrimental mutations that we get. So Sanford's concept of genetic entropy requires natural selection. And that is the central factor. This paper by Crow is saying the exact opposite. What it's saying is we are decreasing in our viability, we're accumulating these harmful mutations because there is no selective pressure, or at least a very slight selective pressure on humans. So because there is nothing weeding out harmful mutations, we're just accumulating them. So it's not at all supporting Sanford's notion. And I've actually pointed out this to some people, to some creationists. It's just a quote mine. That's all it is.
Okay.
Saying the exact opposite of what he wants it to. I've dealt a lot with genetic entropy, and it's just a farce through and through. At some points it makes me wonder if Sanford can read, because if he's going through this paper, he had to have seen that it was talking about natural selection not occurring. So
in other words, the selective pressures we have now are not equal to what they were in the past, and therefore now we're accumulating the genetic mutations at a higher rate. Natural selection, being a purifying process, isn't working the way it was in the past.
Right, because we have agriculture and we have medicine and all sorts of things that can help you survive and make progeny and all this other stuff. And of course, Sanford also discounts pretty much entirely the existence of beneficial mutations. They're always, even if you have a beneficial mutation, it's just something breaking, right? You're becoming less complex, whatever that means. Even if you're gaining a function or whatever, you're always breaking down. There's no even though we have numerous examples of things of like a mutation that increases the function or something like that, these are more or less disregarded. There's a reason that no geneticists refer to genetic entropy outside of creationists.
This is a fitness curve. Dr. Crow indicates that he believes the fitness of the human race is presently degenerating at 1 to 2% per generation due to the accumulation of mutations. A 1% decline in fitness per generation, beginning with a fitness of 1, is shown for a hypothetical human population over a period of 300 generations, which, it's no coincidence, that's 6,000 years. This type of progressive loss of fitness would clearly lead to the dramatic degeneration of the human race within a historical time frame. So what you're looking at here is 1 would represent Adam and Eve. They're the perfect people, no mutations, perfectly created. You go down that curve, you get to 300 generations, that's 6,000 years. That's right where we're at today. And you're going to see a dramatic decline in fitness. Now, what's interesting is this is laid out in the Bible. In the Bible, if you look very carefully, right, what we have here is a fitness curve. You see the age is dropping off. And according to Dr. John Sanford, who was a Cornell University professor who studied this, he used to be an atheist and an evolutionist, he says, it seems highly unlikely this biblical data could have been fabricated. This curve is very consistent with the concept of genomic degeneration caused by mutation accumulation. So what you can see here is Dr. Sanford became a Christian after studying the genetics of this, and he came to the conclusion there's no way what's in the Bible is made up. It matches too closely what we know about genetic mutation and degradation in order to be made up. This isn't fabricated. In fact, it matches it to a 0.9 correlation coefficient. That means it's 90% the same as what we see from genetics.
And did you have anything you wanted to add?
Personally, I didn't look into the math of that. When I saw it, I was like, I just kind of shrugged and was like, okay. I mean, I guess one could look into the math of that, but it's also very hypothetical. His point about, it's 6,000, it's about 6,000 years from the perfect people to today. Well, not even all creationists say the Earth is 6,000 years old. Some say it's upwards of 10,000 years old.
Right.
So
I don't know much about Sanford, but rarely does anyone stop being an atheist and become a Christian because of one area of scientific evidence. It's usually has other things to do with other things going on in their life. A lot of other things. And he makes the claim there that that's the reason why Sanford became a creationist or a Christian, and was because of that one thing of this genetic degradation. And I doubt that's true.
He is a single geneticist, and of the many geneticists out there, he is one of a tiny fraction of a population who actually accepts this idea, and all of his arguments are in error, in major error.
Okay, let's move on to indeterminate growers. What is an indeterminate grower? Okay, now that picture right there, that's not Photoshop, that's real. That's a giant freshwater stingray. Zeb Hogan is the guy in the picture. He has a PhD in fisheries. He's a fisheries biologist heading up the National Geographic funded Mega Fishes project. Now, what is an indeterminate grower? This is an animal that has no specific stopping point to its growth. The longer it lives, the bigger it gets. So here's the interesting thing. Not only were the people living longer before the flood, the animals were also. Now, what relevance does an indeterminate grower have to the fact that people and animals were living longer before the flood? You guessed it. If animals live longer and they're an indeterminate grower, they're going to get a lot bigger. So one of the evidences we would look for the truth of the biblical record is that animals in the past were a lot bigger. If that's true, then that fits our theory, okay? The more power, the more explanatory power a theory has, the more likely that theory is true. And so when we look at the biblical theory and we look at evolutionary theory, we want to say which explains what we see the best. Now, keep in mind that evolutionists teach that animals started out smaller and gradually got more fit and better till we became humans. Whereas the creation account says, no, everything was created perfectly and it's been getting worse and worse over time, not better and better. They have two different claims. Which one fits the facts?
All right. Do you see the problem with that there? There's one pretty obvious problem.
Well,
I don't know that they believe that humans are animals, but if humans are animals, and animals in the past lived a lot longer and didn't stop growing, why was Noah not 70 feet tall?
They misunderstand indeterminate growth, because organisms that are indeterminate growers don't become massive. There's still a size limit. If you're an arthropod and you're an indeterminate grower, there's only so big you can get before you collapse. Or, if you got above a certain size, you would collapse under your own weight.
Right.
Same for humans, same for any organism. You can't get above like a certain size because you'll die. And so
their anatomy isn't designed to handle indeterminate growth, like unlimited indeterminate growth.
Right.
Limits. Yep.
Yeah. And you did a very good job when you talked to Hovind and you were like, well, this is what, would look like, because he claims that what Neanderthals are humans who were very old because they have the sloping brow ridge, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And you were like, no, actually they wouldn't. It would just be like the cartilage on their body would,
Right. Well, we talked about Noah. Yeah. I mean, where your ears, your nose, and your ears continue to get larger as you get older, whether they're growing or sagging or whatever. I had this picture of this guy with this big floppy ears, this big nose, and said if Noah lived to be 900, that's what he'd look like. According to this guy, he'd also be about 700 feet tall or something.
Yeah, he gets to examples of catastrophically large organisms, and we're going to have a good laugh about that, I'm sure.
Yeah, we've got some great specific examples coming up.
Yeah. Whole Earth Science, this is a quote from them. The biggest pterosaur flying over the inland sea is Pteranodon. Like all reptiles, it grows throughout its life. Now, not all reptiles are actually indeterminate growers, but many of them are. And there are other animals that are indeterminate growers. Some animals, they grow and they stop growing at a certain point. It doesn't matter how long they live. Other animals, they'll keep growing and getting bigger and bigger based on how long they live and what they're eating and their fitness. Can you imagine if we have a desert horned lizard that got to live to 600, 700, 800, 900 years? What would he look like if he got to live that long? Well, maybe he'd look like an ankylosaurus. Now, we don't know that for sure, but based on these ideas, this helps us to look at this and go, maybe this has to do with why dinosaurs were so big in the past. This is a Komodo dragon. And if you look here, Komodo dragons are very dangerous. That's Steve Irwin's, the late Steve Irwin's wife, living dangerously like him. Now, maybe if a Komodo dragon lived to 600, 700, 800, 900 years old, maybe it would get that big, huh? We'd have to call in the military every time one showed up. Or maybe it looked like that. That'd be scary, right? I don't know. I'm kind of glad the dinosaurs don't exist anymore. They don't get that big, right? Now, according to this article, these are oysters that were found 11.5 feet wide on top of the mountains in Peru, 2 miles above sea level. This is a paleontologist. I don't know why he's posing on the rock like that, but whatever the case, these are gigantic oysters. More than 500 fossilized giant oysters were found nearly 2 miles above sea level in the Andes Mountains range of Peru. Now, this is interesting. If you've got clams that are this big in the past, but we don't see clams that are this big today, what does it tell us about the past? What it tells us is the past was different, right? If I go down to the beach today, I'm not going to see clams or oysters that are 11.5 feet wide. And so why is it that in the past we had these kinds of animals, but we don't have them today? Right here is a bivalve, a clam. This is a giant bivalve, another example of how big clams were in the past. It's well known today that there were huge, gigantic clams in the past, but we don't have them today. So the past was different than it is today. What was different about the past?
All right, that one earned him the circle with the red slash. The first picture that he showed there, where it was the guy laying on top of the giant oysters, those are actually concretions. They're not oysters. Even creation.com back in 2014 updated their website. You rarely see a creationist website go back and update it once something is proven to be false. They usually just delete it, or they just leave it in the case of most of them. But they had a 2014 update on their article on those that said, these oysters appear to be common concretions. Could it be that internationally published news reports describing these as oysters, based on first-hand assessment by Arturo Vildozola, which is the same person he mentioned, described as a paleontologist, were wrong. When we checked the web for further developments, we found the news reports had prompted debate where contributors echoed that the rocks are concretions, not fossil oysters. So that one was actually retracted by creation.com. It's out there and some other things. The next picture he showed were some clams that were about 3 feet across. We have clams alive today that are 3 feet across.
Right.
I mean, you know, and you know, their recent species have been found that are up to 4.5 feet across. But the other thing is, if you look at the fossil record, they started off smaller, much smaller. Your clams and bivalves and that gastropods, you know, if you go back into the Cambrian and stuff, they started off much smaller than they are, you know, than they got later on. So his idea that they started off large and got smaller, the fossil record doesn't show that, and you can't use hydrologic sorting or whatever to sort that out. If they're in a lower strata, they're older. I mean, that's the law of superposition, you know. So you can't, there's no justification. The flood didn't mix them, whatever. You got smaller species below and larger species above, and we still have large species like that today. So
yeah. Really, it's cherry picking. He's just taking these, you know, this data in most cases. I mean, he didn't have. It's kind of funny because there are examples of large monitor lizards in the past, like, you know, mosasaurs or megalania, which is, you know, large Komodo dragon like monitor. But so I thought it was kind of funny he didn't pick that. But you could equally make the case, like you said, that, you know, everything was smaller in the past. You know, look at horses. The earliest horses are like dog-sized. The earliest rhinos were dog-sized.
I think we get to some of those examples in a minute. Let's take a look, because I think he brings up some of those specific.
The other thing I wanted to say was his pictures. Yeah, he pointed out giant clams still exist. His picture of he had where it said the pteranodon was the largest inland flyer. Well, the pterosaur in that picture was not pteranodon. Also, his idea that a desert, we don't know if a desert horned lizard could have been an ankylosaur. Yes, we do, actually.
Their anatomy is a little bit different there, yeah.
Yeah, they don't have bony scoots coming out of their back. You know, they have the most they have are, you know, it's the integument. They have the spiny integument. It's not bone, which is what ankylosaurs have. And so it's like, you know, the people who say, well, Lucy was just a chimp. It's like, you have no idea what you're talking about.
All right. Well, he's not playing to an audience that knows these things. So
right.
And it's not just clams that were big. This is footprints from the University of Nebraska Museum. And based on the size of the footprints, you would have had a rhinoceros that was 18 feet tall. And if you look right here, this is a comparison. The bottom arm there is a normal rhinoceros, okay? That's a black rhinoceros on the bottom there. And on the top is what's called a giant long-necked rhinoceratoid. Based on the size of that upper bone, now a normal rhinoceros is 2,200 pounds, about 1 ton. But that animal on the top would have been 15 to 20 tons, okay? As big as a huge elephant or a mammoth. And So again, we don't have these today. Why is it we don't have them today, but they existed in the past?
The ancestor of all rhinos was about the size of a pig.
Yep.
And weighed between 50 and 70 pounds. Cambatherium. So, again, we see that there were earlier ancestors of these large species. In certain environments, some animals tend to evolve very large, whether it's, an advantage for competition or whatever. But then a lot of them just eventually get to a certain point where there's another change in the environment and it's no longer an advantage and they go extinct. And that's what we see over and over and over happen again. So,
yeah, absolutely.
They didn't become smaller. That branch of the family died out.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the same with like sauropods. Once kind of the Cretaceous came along, and a lot of their lineage just started just dropping off as the Cretaceous progressed. And again, also they were small to start off and got bigger. I mentioned horses, brought up the rhinos. Elephants are the same, pig-sized ancestors, and then these things got larger over time. So the elephants we have today are much larger than a lot of their ancestors were. So it's just cherry picking the data.
Right.
Extremely limited data.
Again, with the mammoths and things like that, the environment change made it no longer advantageous to be, a large woolly animal has an advantage in a cold weather climate. When the climate changed, it was no longer an advantage. So that's one of the reasons they went extinct. You can't say that the ones that are alive today, there are or degraded from something that was larger before, because they were of a different lineage that didn't get so large, and the large ones went extinct. So he has it all wrong.
This right here is a 3.5-inch wingspan of a dragonfly. This right here is a 30-inch wingspan from a dragonfly fossil. This was found in Italy. Now, can you imagine running into a dragonfly that big? You know how when you're driving down the freeway on one of those desert highways, all these bugs are hitting your windshield? Can you imagine if the bugs were that big hitting your windshield? It'd blow your windshield right out. What would you do? You'd be in real trouble. Imagine if one of these came flying into your house. How would you kill it? You couldn't use a fly swatter. You'd have to use like a shotgun or something. The reality here is again, the Bible says everything was better, bigger, and more fit in the past, and today things are getting worse. Evolutionary theory says everything started off less fit and has been getting better. Survival of the fittest. But is that what we see? I don't think so. Again, here is a model of a gigantic dragonfly. They're doing this for a museum display.
All right. Yeah. Well, damselflies are the closest, cousin to the dragonflies, and they never got big. So, some lineages of dragonflies did get big, but there were also smaller dragonflies alive at the same time. And again, we see them evolve from smaller species.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he keeps assuming that because something is larger, it is automatically more fit. That there's just no evidence to support that at all.
Right.
And he says it's like, oh, it's survival of the fittest. No, it's not.
Right. When the environment changes, it's the extreme animals of any type that aren't able to adapt, or that are, suited for just one type of environment, that suffer. And today's dragonflies did not descend from those large dragonflies. The large dragonflies went extinct.
Yeah, absolutely.
Here is a giant hissing cockroach. These are real and these exist today. They hiss. Right? You can pet them. I was at a fair once where they were passing these around. They've also found giant cockroach fossils in Ohio, 4 inches long. That is a big cockroach. I wouldn't be happy about meeting one of those. I mean, could you step on a cockroach that big? That would be really scary to find cockroaches that big. It would just start gnawing on your leg or something.
All right, I almost hate to stop so quick again right there, but now here he's kind of going backwards, because he's talking about the giant cockroaches that are alive today. And you go back in the past, and cockroaches were smaller than the ones he just described. So I don't know why he brought up giant cockroaches that are around today, but early cockroaches, 3 inches or so, 3 to 3.5 inches was max. And we actually find bigger ones today. than we did back then. So it was kind of the opposite.
Yeah, it's kind of like the clams example. It's like, is he aware of the biodiversity of the life that he's talking about? It doesn't really seem like it.
Nope.
This right here is a supposed ancestor to centipedes and millipedes. It was 8 feet long. Now, I would be afraid to let my daughter play in the backyard if these kinds of bugs existed today. An 8-foot long centipede, very scary, or millipede. Here's a fossil centipede, 8 foot long, has been found. Again, now this one's not real. This is just a funny picture. But they have found the fossils of centipedes measuring 8.5 feet long in Germany. Now, they say on there that it existed 296 million years ago. But how do they know that? Where do they get that from? They need that time in order to make evolution make sense. But the reality is, if we look specifically at the historical record recorded in the Bible, no, animals just recently died off that were that big, and many of them were killed in the flood. And God created everything perfectly, and then it slowly has been getting worse.
All right. Well, I'm not so sure why I stopped right there. I just kind of like the giant crickets picture, but
he says that the Arthropleura is the ancestor of centipedes and millipedes. Well, Arthropleura is a millipede, so it's not going to be the ancestor of both when they'd already diverged from each other. I think it's also funny, he says, he also gets his history backwards. He says, oh, these long time scales, they have to have these to make evolution work. No, it was well known among naturalists that the Earth was at least millions of years old long before evolution was ever a thing, long before Darwin published Origin of Species. So that's a common creationist trope that's just completely backwards historically. You had Lyell and others who were like, yeah, the Earth is probably pretty ancient.
Yeah, I didn't know over 4 billion, but they certainly had the idea that it was millions and millions of years old. So.
Right. Yeah.
Now, I don't know if they've ever found crickets yet. This is a Photoshop picture, but that would be pretty crazy to be hunting crickets. Instead of hunting wild boars, you'd be hunting wild crickets, right? They have found fossils of 2-foot-long snails. The largest snail today is the giant African land snail. It can reach 7 inches. This is 24-inch long snails. Fossil cattails 60 feet long have been found in sedimentary rock. There was a donkey that was excavated near Lubbock, Texas that was 9 feet high at the shoulder. That is huge. That would be a very scary donkey to run into, right? Giant sloths lived on Earth before the flood. They were called Megatherium. This is from the Natural History Museum in London. You can see it there. Huge, gigantic sloths. The Smithsonian even has sloth dung. Right? It's a scratch and sniff museum. There, you can take your kids there, and they can hold the sloth dung. That was found in 1941. Giant elk with 12-foot antlers lived on Earth at one point in time. Here's a picture I got off the internet with a man. I wanted to show the comparison between a man and a giant elk, and you can see how huge that thing is. There are even giant kangaroos that lived on Earth in the past. This is an article from Sydney. It says, a remarkable cache of prehistoric marsupial remains, including giant lions, 10-foot-tall kangaroos, and a wombat the size of a mini, has been unearthed in remote caves in the Australian outback. Now, can you imagine a wombat the size of a mini? Now, you've probably not heard of a wombat unless you live in Australia, but a wombat is kind of like a guinea pig or a hamster. And if you had a wombat the size of a mini, well, you could ride it to school or something, or ride it to work. That'd be fantastic. You'd save a lot of money on gasoline. Maybe not food, though. This is from MSNBC, an ancient rodent the size of a buffalo. It says here, it would be an exterminator's worst nightmare. A 1,545-pound rodent with a voracious appetite and big teeth. Resembling a guinea pig grown to the size of a buffalo, And then here's where they get it wrong. The animal lived millions of years ago in a South American swamp and is thought to be history's biggest rodent. Now, what they get right here is that it's a huge, gigantic rodent. What they get wrong is that it existed millions of years ago, because there's no evidence for that. We have all the evidence supporting the theory of creation, but we don't have the evidence supporting millions of years. The fossils don't date to millions of years. And if you haven't taken our class yet on dating fossils and the age of the Earth, we're going to get to that soon. And you'll learn all about how fossils are dated and why there's no evidence that this rodent is millions of years old.
That, some of the animals that he showed in this earlier part of this last section, especially the giant sloth and things, these are animals that lived recently. I mean, we're talking the last ice age and recently, even more recent than that. And I can't find a creationist that says that the ice age was before the flood. I mean, they all talk about that being after the flood. So he's just kind of going through grabbing big animals here. He's not thinking it through. I mean, he's wrong anyway, but he's not even making a good creationist argument. You wouldn't have Ken Ham or, even maybe Ken Hovind out there saying, giant sloths died during the flood and they were bigger than it. I mean, he's just off. He's just going along picking big animals. So.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's really no rhyme or reason. With that, he says, he also says all the big sloths were Megatherium, even though there are actually a number of species. There were several genera of giant sloths other than Megatherium. There's Lestodon, Glossotherium, Solidotherium. There are lots of them, and we have DNA from some of them because paleogenomics is.
And we see where they split off from glyptodonts, and there were also smaller sloths at the time. I mean,
right.
It was they weren't all larger. We also had aquatic sloths. I mean, how come?
Thalassocnus, yeah. The Megatherium is you have the two. I saw one paper that said you have the two-toed and three-toed sloths, and they were sister to each other. Then you had Lestodon, who was sister to them, and then you had Megatherium, who was sister to all of them. And so, they're all the common ancestor, split, and they went different ways. Some became larger, some became smaller. Doesn't mean they were more fit. I mean, which survived? The smaller ones.
Exactly.
And so, it's ridiculous. He also mentioned the giant rodent that was Phoberomys, which is a caviomorph, which is in the group of guinea pigs, and also the South American porcupines. I think are also in the caviomorphs, because the African porcupines are in a different group than the South American porcupines. They're convergently evolved, interestingly enough. But he says there's no evidence that it was living millions of years ago. Well, if you look at the assemblage of fossils that it was living with, this is an animal that's living alongside notoungulates, none of which exist today. It's living with different platyrrhines, the New World monkeys. There's a whole different fauna and also presumably flora around at this time, which is completely different from today. And so to just kind of shrug it off and say, oh, well, there's no evidence for it. Have you bothered to look?
What happens when a Jackson chameleon lives to 900 years old? Maybe it becomes a triceratops. See, what dinosaurs were, they were big lizards that lived a long time and were able to get huge. So let's continue to examine. Biblical creationists believe humans and dinosaurs did live together. People have seen live dinosaurs, and dinosaurs went extinct recently, not millions of years ago. Okay, so let's review our two basic theories about dinosaurs in the past. Remember, creationists say everything was created approximately 6,000 years ago. 4,400 years ago, there was a flood. 2,000 years ago, Christ came, and here we are today. An evolutionist says about 14 or 15 billion years ago, a Big Bang occurs. 4.6 billion years ago, Earth forms. 3.8 billion years ago, the first life appears. And 2.5 million years ago, the human line diverges from ape-like ancestors. According to creationists, dinosaurs were created with everything else in those 6 days about 6,000 years ago. According to evolutionists, dinosaurs evolved 230 million years ago and went extinct 65 million years ago. Let's continue to look at the evidence. So Noah was 600 when he went into the ark, and then he lived for an additional 300 years. According to the Bible, were dinosaurs on the ark, or is this cartoon correct, right? There are the dinosaurs looking at the boat. They're standing on a little island as the waters are rising up. Oh, snap, was that today? They forgot to get on the ark, and that's why dinosaurs are extinct today. They forgot to get on the ark. Bummer. Some people might say, weren't the dinosaurs too big to fit on the ark? You can see here Noah's looking on. Shem and Ham and Japheth there are trying to get on this gigantic dinosaur, and they can't get him in. How could Noah have possibly fit dinosaurs on the ark? How was it possible for your mother to give birth to you? Even the largest full-grown creatures were once small, and that's important to remember. You know, a 6 foot, 7 foot guy wasn't born 7 foot. He's born as a little child, and dinosaurs are born as babies too. They're not always big. Of course, big ones get all the news and get all the press, but small ones, in fact, most dinosaurs were actually small. The average size of dinosaur fossils is actually the size of a sheep. And so here we have it, very, very small Apatosaurus. It grew from the size of your pillow to the size of your bed. All Noah needed to do was make sure he had a pink one and a blue one and to get them on the boat, and he'd be good to go. Why would he bring babies or adolescents? Well, they're going to be smaller. The biggest dinosaur egg found is smaller than a football. Here it is. This is from National Geographic. And you can see the largest dinosaur egg ever found is not really that big. They're going to weigh less. They eat less. They sleep a lot more. They're tougher, right? If you have an older person, when older people fall down, they don't get up as quick as younger people. On the other hand, my son, when he falls down, he typically gets up very quick. And I have lots of stories about him falling down and getting up. I remember a story, I came in the backyard and he was going down the whoop-de-doo slide in our backyard, and there was a big wheel at the top of the whoop-de-doo slide. And he was sitting on it. He said, "Dad, I'm gonna go." And I said, "Well, I don't know if that's a good idea. Your mother wouldn't like that." And he said, "Well, I'm gonna do it." And I said, "Well, I'm too far away to be able to stop you." And he went down the slide, and as soon as he hit that first whoop-de-doo, he's flying through the air, and he hits the ground, and I'm thinking, oh no, I'm really going to be in trouble here with my wife. And he pops up all of a sudden, and he says, "Dad, I'm okay. I'm going to do it again." And I said, "That's my boy." And I told him to hold on. I just needed to get my video camera. But little kids, when they fall down, they get up again. But adults, when they fall down, a lot of times, especially if they're older, it's a lot more difficult for them to get up. So it makes sense that Noah would bring adolescents or child dinosaurs on the ark. After the flood, they're also going to live a lot longer to produce more offspring. And of course, that's why he brought them in the first place, is to procreate and make lots more dinosaurs.
Okay, I'm not going to stop here, but I did throw in a clip that shows what another young earth creationist has to say about this.
It says in Job that God could threaten them, that God is the only one that could take him out. So I believe God did, because since we don't see him anymore. Having said that, I believe that the simplest way to explain that dinosaurs would no longer exist is this: there's no reference to dinosaurs being loaded on that ark.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
At least he's honest, right? He's not trying to cram dinosaurs into the Bible. So I think that's a fair point.
Well, it's funny because that's from a discussion I had with Aaron Ra last week. We were critiquing that guy, and here we've got a mega church pastor who's in charge of a string of mega churches, and he's talking to tens of thousands of people all the time about this, and he's teaching that dinosaurs went extinct during the flood. There was no mention of them being on the ark. And then we've got these other guys that are trying to fit dinosaurs on the ark. There's no science behind this. There's no coordination behind this. It's all speculation. And to be honest, Ken Ham and Kent Hovind have realized that dinosaurs sell to kids. So they want those dinosaurs on the ark. God didn't kill the dinosaurs. They went extinct for some other reason. God wouldn't kill dinosaurs, I mean, it's pretty obvious, but I just had to throw that clip in there to show that, these guys don't all say the same thing, and there's really no reason to what they say other than, what the other guy said made sense.
Yeah, he did that thing again where he said, maybe if this organism got large, then it would become this other thing. No, it wouldn't. For one thing, there are major differences between the skeletons of Lepidosauros and Archosaurs. If you look at Triceratops, it's an ornithischian. It has a special bone on the tip of its it's on tip of the. No, it's on the bottom jaw. I think it's called the predentary. It's a little bone that only ornithischians have. So the hadrosaurs, the iguanodontians, stegosaurs, and chylosaurs, they all have this predentary bone. There are no lepidosaurs that have the predentary bone. It also doesn't have the same hip structure.
Right.
It has the pubis pointing backwards like a bird, rather than forward. The lizard hip rather than the lizard hip structure. And so that's ridiculous. I think I made another note. Oh yes, the average dinosaur size was that of a sheep. Do you know where that claim comes from?
Yeah, well, actually, I cut the video out where he shows it. There was he showed about a 10-minute video. Well, 5-minute video probably. And it's made by
Answers in Genesis.
Was it Answers? Yeah, Answers in Genesis.
Well, do you know where they got it?
No, I mean they showed the video. They added up sizes and blah 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 and whatever.
So it turns out it's very funny because I met a creationist at a Gem and Mineral show, and this was not long after I met RJ, so I asked him to look it up, and actually have the Answers book 1 to the Answers in Genesis book. And Ken Ham wrote the chapter where they make that claim. Turns out he cites 2 sources for that. One of them is a secondary, so it's a popular science book that just kind of makes an offhanded claim about it. The other one is, and I kid you not, he cites Jurassic Park. If you look up technical literature on dinosaur size, there is none saying that it was that the average size was that of a sheep. Because what is the point of that? What's the point of averaging dinosaur sizes? It doesn't do anything. The Answers in Genesis wrote a paper on it where they averaged the sizes, and it came out to about the size of a bull, so pretty close. But again, it's like, who cared? There's only one ad hoc reason that they would even try to average the sizes in the first place, and that's to fit them on the ark. It doesn't mean anything ecologically, biologically. It means nothing. So,
well, I have my favorite Ken Ham book right here.
Oh boy,
Dinosaurs of Eden. I keep that handy when I'm talking with creationists or talking about it, because it's one of the few books that actually shows the saddles that they put on the dinosaurs when they wrote them. So, yeah.
Of course.
There is a Dutch man who's actually rebuilt Noah's Ark. It actually floats and might be coming to a port near you sometime soon. He's traveling the world with Noah's Ark and sharing the gospel as he has people come on board, and it's kind of like a museum, and tells people all about Genesis and Noah's Ark and Jesus Christ. So pretty phenomenal what he's done there.
Okay, now this is a video of what actually happened when the Dutch guy took off and went on the maiden voyage, I think it was there. He was blown by the wind and ended up smashing into a whole bunch of other boats. I cut this from a news clip. Here they are coming to rescue the Noah's Ark. And there's some of the damage it did. Luckily, no animals were hurt. So,
yeah, I looked up because I'd never heard this guy referenced before. So I looked it up, and it's like, of course, it's not actually seaworthy. I think it can't handle waves more than a meter tall or 2 meters, something like that.
It was built on a barge. I mean, it wasn't, an actual Noah's Ark boat. I mean, it was built on a barge there. So, but I just had to throw that clip in because this was recorded right before that guy left and headed out onto the sea, and he didn't make it very far that time. Yeah, they had to rescue him, and it's a good thing there were no animals on board.
So what happened to the dinosaurs when they got off the ark? Did they all go extinct? Here it is. This little cartoon's pretty funny. The real reason dinosaurs became extinct, they were smoking. There you go. So kids, don't smoke. According to National Geographic, what killed dinosaurs? New ideas about the wipeout. And here it says volcanic eruptions may have been culling dinosaurs before an asteroid struck. This is from the BBC. nature, prehistoric life, Cretaceous tertiary mass extinction. Some sort of gigantic asteroid hit the planet and killed all the dinosaurs. Now, of course, the immediate question that comes up in your mind here is, why didn't the asteroid kill everything else also? And yet this is used as a reason as to why the dinosaurs went extinct. Maybe it was a meteor that just had a grudge against dinosaurs, right? It was a dinosaur-seeking meteor. Now, that doesn't really make sense.
Oh boy, yeah, it doesn't make any sense, and that's why no one's ever proposed it.
Right. Yeah. The thing is, I mean, we pretty much know, it's pretty conclusive that a meteor struck the Earth 66 million years ago. We have the impact of it in Yucatan. We have a layer of iridium all across the Earth, which doesn't form in large quantities on Earth. We have there's shock quartz and all these all sorts of indicators that there was a meteoric impact in Yucatan, all sorts of geologic indicators. So it's kind of ridiculous to say, nope, didn't happen. But it didn't kill everything. It killed, from what I remember, I think they said it killed everything pretty much above like 60 pounds, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the damage was going to be a lot worse closer to the impact site than further away from it. But I think it's less interesting what happened to the dinosaurs, because it seemed in some places they were already on the slide towards extinction. Like he mentioned the volcanoes. Like if you look at North America, the biodiversity of dinosaurs greatly drops off from the early to late Cretaceous, and in part there was a middle Cretaceous extinction which wiped out a lot of different dinosaur groups, like the Acrocanthosaurs, or the Carcharodontosaurs, of which Acrocanthosaurus was a member, got hit pretty hard by the middle Cretaceous extinction, which is why Tyrannosaurs came to prominence afterwards.
It wasn't it the Deccan traps that
yes,
geological formation, or that was active at the time, that pumped an awful lot of things into the atmosphere that would have warmed the climate, in addition to the meteors. So it was a double whammy. It wasn't just one thing. It was happening for a while. That seems to be what pretty much finished them off. We don't see any non-avian dinosaurs above that point in the rock layers. So
yeah, and like I said, I think it's less interesting what happened to the dinosaurs. It seems pretty clear, they got wiped out by the meteor because they were already kind of on their way out in some cases. What's more interesting to me is what happened to the prehistoric aquatic critters. Why did the mosasaurs die out? Why did the plesiosaurs die out? That's the more interesting question, I think.
The acidity or whatever in the water chemistry of the water changed, after that. And again, I think it had to do with a lot of the other volcanic activity that was going on. So, we lost, I don't know what the percentage was of marine life at that time, but I mean, it was way up there. So,
yeah, because there was, as they were dying off, the reef fish were undergoing their own radiation, like around, maybe it was just after the Cretaceous extinction. They had a big radiation, so
no predators.
yeah, they had like two big waves of radiation. So
and the mammals. Yep.
No more big meat-eating dinosaurs. So.
Here's another one. This is on Fox News. Dinosaurs gassed themselves into extinction, British scientists say. Okay, so this one actually says that dinosaurs may have farted themselves to extinction, according to a new study from British scientists. So this sounds crazy, and I know you're probably laughing, but it's real. They really think that it's possible that the dinosaurs gave off so much methane that they killed themselves through farting. Horrible. What a brutal way to die.
I think we'll just go through this one. I let it ride. I do remember that article coming out. I don't remember anybody talking about it after that.
About how the dinosaurs wiped out, because here's what we know from the Bible, and we can infer from the Bible, is that dinosaurs were on the ark, but when they got off the ark, they went extinct not too soon afterwards. The first problem dinosaurs had when they got off the ark was, after the flood, the environmental changes made it much more difficult to survive. If you've ever seen what happens after a flood, it's very devastating. You can see here this picture. This is a complete wipeout of all the trees pushed down into a lake. And if you looked at the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and the flood there that happened, just complete devastation. And so you have to be thinking about, this is what the animals came to. And there's going to be less vegetation. There's going to be less things for them to survive on. It's going to be more hostile. But not only that, the second problem they had was worse. People actually hunted them. Now, a lot of people don't realize this, but in Genesis chapter 9, it says this: "Then God blessed Noah and his sons and told them, 'Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth.'" Okay, this is right after they get off the ark. God says, "All the animals of the earth, all the birds of the sky, all the small animals that scurry along the ground, and all the fish of the sea will look on you with fear and terror." Now, when we read that, what we can infer is that they didn't actually look on people with fear and terror prior to the flood. It wasn't until after the flood that animals began to look on people with fear and terror. There wasn't a close relationship between people and animals. Now, there's always people that try to make friends with wild animals. You'll see the people that play with tigers or go out into the forest and live with the grizzly bears or go off and live with the monkeys. And, you know, these people are placing themselves in a risky situation. People have died because of that. And there's only so much you can get along with animals. Now, that's not the way God originally intended it. The original intention, it's very clear, was that animals and people would get along, that there would not be death. And this is recorded in the scriptures, both in Genesis and in other books of the Bible. And this is why the Bible says that the earth is going to be redeemed. And part of that process, what that means is that there is going to be a reconnection between people and animals. And it says here, "I have placed them in your power. I have given them to you for food, just as I have given you grain and vegetables." Remember, in the beginning, he gives Adam and Eve all the plants to eat, all the fruit, all the grain to eat, but he hasn't given them animals to eat. But now animals can be eaten. And so what's going to happen is it's going to be more difficult for animals to survive. All these stories we have of knights slaying dragons. Is it possible that those stories aren't completely fictional, but that they're based in reality? And what those dragons actually were was dinosaurs? Well, I'm going to give you some evidence, very compelling evidence, that that's exactly what was going on. Dinosaurs were most likely killed by people for meat because they were a menace, to be a hero, right? Save the village from the dragon. I got to make a name for myself, got to do something big. To prove his superiority, competition for land, medicinal purposes. A lot of people don't know this, but a lot of ancient recipes call for dragon's blood or dragon's eggs.
All right. Yeah. So there's absolutely no evidence for any of that. You know, with mammoths, mastodons, you know, all these animals that we know people hunted for meat 10,000, 20,000 years ago, we have evidence. You know, we have spear points stuck in ribs or whatever. We have evidence of butcher marks on bones. We see stone tools used to cut meat left at sites where we find the fossil remains.
Right.
We've never found that with a dinosaur once, ever, anywhere. We don't even find them in the same layers. We've never found a human fossil originating from the same layer as we find a dinosaur fossil like that.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
absolutely crazy. Because there were a menace, well, he's making an assumption that they were alive there. To be a hero, same thing. He's making an assumption that they were alive. So all these things are competition for land. The only thing that there's a different point on really is medicinal purposes. And I think he mentions that, you know, the Chinese mentioned that, yeah, they grind up dragon bones, but, you know, the Chinese called every fossil dragon bones. I mean, there's a great book, The First Fossil Hunters, and by Adrienne Mayer here, and she goes through and talks. They do talk about some of the stuff in China, and you know, people found these fossils, these dinosaur fossils and ice age fossils, and that's where a lot of the myths of giants and dragons come from. They didn't have a concept of extinction. They didn't have a concept of deep time, where animals were around and went extinct a long time ago. So they just assumed these were things that died not that long ago. And that's why we get a lot of those myths. But pretty much any fossil, I mean, human or hominin, I should say, remains, or Homo erectus remains in that. We're sold in markets, as I mean, but they're calling all this stuff dragon bones. They call pretty much any fossil dragon bones. So there's just absolutely no evidence for any of it. And it's just complete speculation based on the fact that he thinks they were around at that time.
There was an interesting video by Trey the Explainer. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his video.
I've seen a couple of them, but not a lot. Yeah.
He does a lot of cryptozoology stuff. And an interesting point he made was a lot of the cryptozoological critters historically have either come out of time periods right after or during some major cultural event. It's like, it's no coincidence that the first sighting of the Loch Ness Monster was the same year as King Kong. It's or another one was, there was a creature like attacking these rural villages in France, but they were also under harsh economic times, right? And
Right.
so it kind of makes sense that there are these events shaping the lives of the people either positively or negatively, and then they're projecting these things onto nature, right? And kind of this sort of confirmation bias. And so like you said, there's no evidence that anyone was cutting up dragons. We have lots of examples of dinosaurs with tooth marks in their bones.
It's not human.
Tyrannosaurs were eating hadrosaurs and things like that. So we find the punctures in the bones from tyrannosaurs. No cut marks from axes or anything like that. So
Yeah.
Coincidence? I think not.
One last point. He goes, I want to do one more. I skip forward to see a little bit there, and there is one spot where he does talk about right here. He mentions a couple other things on the dinosaurs, but then it was just more the same. But then he does talk about how we determine the age of the Earth. So let's look at that.
In 1770, George Buffon said the Earth was 70,000 years old. In 1905, the age of the Earth was officially 2 billion years old, according to Newsweek. And in 1969, the official age of the Earth and Moon was 3.5 billion years old. Today, according to the Smithsonian, the Earth is 4.6 billion years old. Now, if you notice a pattern here, do they really know how old the Earth is? No, they don't. They're just guessing. If they were right, the Earth is getting older at a rate of 21 million years per year for the last 220 years. That's 40 years per minute.
Okay. Yeah, that's ridiculous. I mean, none of that math made any sense. I mean, sure it does if you think that we think that, the Earth is getting older like that, but I mean, it's not. What the difference is the technology has advanced. We only had an idea a couple hundred years ago that the Earth was very old. Now, in every instance he gave, we knew that the Earth was at least that old. But up until we had radiometric dating methods, we weren't able to really determine a closer, near exact age of the Earth. We could just pretty much tell it was at least that old. And the methods we used weren't that good. I mean, without radiometric dating, what do you have? You really don't have much. I've got Dana's 1897 revised textbook on geology here. I collect some of these books too, and
Wow.
they talk about using one of the means of estimating the length of past time is that afforded by the rate of recession of the falls of Niagara. So, I mean, at that time, common sense told them, we know that things around here in this area, they weren't talking really the age of the Earth, but that this, in this formation are at least this old based on, if it's eroding at the rate of 6 feet a year, or I'm guessing,
Sure.
I have no idea what it was, but, and it's so many feet, then, divided up in how many years it was. astonishingly, they actually got fairly close. It said that, you know, the erosion of the entire gorge has been estimated at up to 10,000 years, which, you know, at the end of the last ice age, they weren't too far off. It was probably actually a little older than that, I think, you know, with the, but you know, they were closer than you would think, but still, they weren't using that to date the age of the Earth, you know, and at that time, I mean, we knew that the Earth was hundreds of millions of years old, but I mean, they were estimating things that we know now that are, you know, 500 million year time periods is 50 to 60 million years back then. They really didn't know. And the use of index fossils was, they relied that on a lot more, not to actually date the age of the Earth, but to correlate. If you find something in Europe and you find it in Europe and these layers have these certain fossils, but they're only found over here, and we have more stratigraphy over here to see how that it is ancient, they were able to say, okay, that's ancient too, because of the correlation of the index fossils. But they weren't assigning an exact date to it. All we could really tell at that point was the minimum age of things. And what we were seeing him give examples of are the minimum ages that the Earth could have been, which none of them were wrong. They were still way short, but you know, the Earth was still that old. So,
I believe in Origin of Species, Darwin made note of a formation. It was like a limestone formation that was accruing at like 2 inches a year or something like that. And, you know, it did the same kind of math. You just, you know, estimate backwards, and it's 50 million years or whatever. But yeah, you know, they did what they could with what they had. So I can't really fault them for that. But he said they don't know, they're just guessing. It's like, well, knowing for certain and, you know, having a reasonable understanding of something and then just guessing are two completely different things.
Right.
You know, these are, you know, 4.5 billion years old is a reasonable estimate based on all of the data we've collected so far, not just from the geology that we have here on Earth, but also from looking at the other planets in our solar system and all that jazz. And so, you know, all these things correlate and it gives us about that age. And so that's not anywhere near just throwing darts at a wall, you know.
Right. I mean, right now we're establishing the minimum age of the Earth using multiple radiometric dating methods, including, you know, isochron methods, where we don't have to have an assumption of initial parent-daughter ratio, and the methods complement each other, and we're getting the similar results, you know, in the same range, and we're establishing that the oldest rocks on Earth are over 4 billion years old, and so we know it's at least that old because the oldest rocks here are that old, and then we establish a closer age by looking at the formation of, you know, when meteorites were formed by, you know, meteorites that have been collected that have been found here. So we can tell again, you know, that's going to be when the solar system was formed. So we look at that and the oldest rocks on Earth, and we determine basically about the time the Earth was formed. It's not a guess. It's, you're working out, you know, minimums and maximums there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I am certain he's never opened up a technical paper on radiometric dating. If someone were to ask him, you know, about isochrons, for instance, he would have no idea about any of that. So, I mean, he's just repeating tropes. That's really all his presentation is. Just a repetition of tropes, because like you said, he's just kind of trawling through the arguments and taking in whatever he likes. He's not reading these accounts firsthand. And, you know, if you were to ask him about it, it's like, hey, you know, have you read any technical literature? He'd probably say no.
Right.
Probably has never read any technical literature.
Right. Well, listen, I want to thank you. It's been awesome, Jackson. And we've been going at it here for over 2 hours. I'm not sure what the cut version will look like, because I'll probably cut out a little bit there and to get it down to something watchable, you know, but it's been awesome. So
oh yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And again, your channel, just your name, Jackson Wheat. I've got creationsciencefiction.com is my website. I have a blog on there that I do 3-4 times a week at least. And then, my video channel, of course, just Bill Ludlow. You're welcome to upload this to yours too. So great. And I hope to work with you and talk with you more in the future.
All right. Well, thanks again.